Begin tonight keeping him honest with something we have not seen very often from this president, an opportunity to watch him doing more than just making a speech or signing a bill. This afternoon, President Trump let the cameras stay for a bipartisan meeting at the White House on immigration. It was, to be sure, carefully stage managed. There's no doubt about it. It was also a bit of a high wire act, showing this president at work and command in the thick of tough negotiations on complicated issues. It has potential and obvious pitfalls, but it was done, according to CNN's reporting, to counter the narrative that this is a president working and not a president cooped up in the residence watching TV and tweeting, and his supporters are certainly praising him for that tonight. At the same time, for nearly an hour of what must be said was pretty gripping television, viewers, as well as the lawmakers in that room, also saw some of the president's other well-known characteristics, including his well-documented fogginess on policy details and his eagerness during face-to-face moments to be liked. We also got to watch someone who bills himself as a master dealmaker do what he says he does best. And it really matters. On March 5th, a program called DACA expires. That's the program that gives people who were brought here legally as children the right to stay and work here. As you know, the president has been trying to make funding for the border wall a condition of keeping DACA, sending Congress a long list of demands back in October, including 10,000 more ICE agents, also ending so-called chain migration, a crackdown on sanctuary cities, and more. Keeping him honest, though, what emerged from the meeting today was basically confusion, because the president, whether you agree or disagree with him on immigration, was all over the place from beginning to the very end when he said this.
I think my positions are going to be what the people in this room come up with. If they come to me with things that I'm not in love with, I'm going to do it because I respect them.
So it was that kind of talk that drew sharp criticism from his right for caving to Democrats. Ann Coulter, for instance, tweeting that, quote, nothing Michael Wolff could say about @real Donald Trump has hurt him as much as the DACA love fest right now. Well, that said, it's hard to know what to think because what the president said depended largely on who he was talking to and apparently the extent to which he understood the details. For instance, at one moment in the meeting, the president seemed willing to deal with only DACA with no strings attached at all.
What about a clean DACA bill now, and with a commitment that we go into a comprehensive immigration reform procedure like we did back, I remember when Kennedy was here, and it was really a major effort, and it was a great disappointment that it went nowhere.
I remember that. I have no problem. I think that's basically what Dick is saying. We're going to come out with DACA. We're going to do DACA, and then we can start immediately on the phase 2, which would be comprehensive.
Would you be agreeable to that?
Yeah, I would like to do that. Go ahead. I think a lot of people would like to see that, but I think we have to do DACA first.
All right, so there he's saying do DACA first, talking about a clean bill. The president agreeing by the sound of it to a bill with none of the other stuff the White House has been pushing for months, and then seemingly to agree to comprehensive immigration reform on top of that. But maybe not. Watch what happens next as House Majority Leader, Republican Kevin McCarthy, jumps in, steering the talk back to those conditions that the president himself has been demanding in the past.
Mr. President, you need to be clear, though. I think what Senator Feinstein's asking here, when we talk about just DACA, we don't want to be back here 2 years later. You have to have security, as the Secretary would tell you.
So, and as Congressman McCarthy talked, the president began agreeing with him as well.
It's kind of like 3 pillars. DACA, because we're all in the room want to do it. Border security, so we're not back out here, and chain migration. It's just 3 items, and then everything else that's comprehensive is kind of moved to the side. So I believe when the president talks about DACA and the lottery,
and I think you should add merit. I mean, if you can, add merit-based. No, I don't think, I don't know who's going to argue with merit-based.
So in the space of about 2 minutes, the president seemed to totally abandon his long-held positions, then re-embrace them, and then barely a minute or so later, seemed to flip back.
I think what we're all saying is we'll do DACA, and we can certainly start comprehensive immigration reform the following afternoon, okay? We'll take an hour off, and then we'll start.
So talking to Republican Kevin McCarthy, and the president remembers some of the hardline measures he's demanding in exchange for letting several 100,000 Dreamers stay in the country, and talking to Democrat Dianne Feinstein, it's Dreamers first, then what he calls comprehensive immigration reform. Also curiously absent from today's meeting, not a word about this.
We are going to build a great border wall. And who's going to pay for the wall? Who's going to pay for the wall? Who? It'll be a great wall. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. Mexico is going to pay for the wall.
Mexico will pay for the wall.
And Mexico is going to pay for the wall, and they understand that. Mexico is going to pay for the wall, believe me, 100%.
Again, nothing at the meeting about Mexico paying for the wall. However, on that note, the president did just tweet about the wall. CNN's Jim Acosta joins us. So, Jim, any mention of who pays for it in that tweet?
There's no mention of Mexico paying for the wall in that tweet. Of course, the president has not said since he's been in office, neither has this administration said anything about how they're going to force Mexico to pay for a wall on the border. I think that's been abandoned and left for dead, although the White House press secretary said that the president still believes that Mexico will pay for the wall. Putting all of that aside, we should show this tweet because I think it offers some clarity, Anderson, to what you were just talking about a few moments ago, which is that the president was sort of all over the place at this meeting. The president tweeted in just the last several minutes, as I made very clear today, our country needs the security of the wall on the southern border, which must be part of any DACA approval. And that was the question that we had all day long, Anderson, which is, would the president be okay with a deal that protects these dreamers now, gets that off the table so we don't have 700,000 or 800,000 kids who were brought to this country through no fault of their own, actually seeing them being deported on the evening news, and deal with this wall discussion later. The president is now saying very clearly tonight in that tweet that that is not the case. He wants this wall.
Let me start this Keeping Him Honest segment by getting one thing out of the way. Here at 360, we are all in favor of people watching more cable news whenever they like, as much as they like, and that goes for everyone, even the President of the United States. Not that he does watch a lot of cable news. In fact, here's what he tweeted back in July. Quote, "The White House is functioning perfectly, focused on health care, tax cuts, reform, and many other things. I have very little time for watching TV." That tweet went out at 9:39 a.m. Eastern Time. The president tweets a lot in the morning, especially about what he is watching on cable news programs, sometimes within minutes of the segment in question. Now, apparently that tweet wasn't enough for the president, so back in November, he told reporters, quote, "I don't get to watch much television, primarily because of documents. I'm reading documents a lot." Now, it's not exactly news that the president is doing precisely what he says he's not doing, but now we have a more detailed look at the president's schedule. The website Axios got a look at copies of the president's private schedule. Every morning, he has a 3-hour period called executive time. According to the documents Axios has, executive time is from 8 to 11 a.m. Now, during executive time, you might think he would be in the Oval Office or elsewhere in the West Wing doing executive stuff. Instead, according to Axios, this is the last place you will actually find him. Officials telling Axios that executive time almost always means TV and Twitter time alone in the residence. So if that's true, he starts his workday around 11 and usually wraps up at 6, sometimes even earlier. By comparison, President Obama rose early, worked out, and was at the office between 9 and 10. President George W. Bush began his workday at 6:45, which doesn't mean that this president or any president shouldn't observe whatever schedule they wish. And for the record, this president's workday was, in fact, longer at the beginning of his administration. It's certainly a difficult job, and he's entitled to do it any way he sees fit. However, keeping him honest, it does seem a little rich to be tweeting that you don't watch a lot of television at the very moment you're almost certainly watching television. It's a little rich to say that you're just too busy with documents when you reportedly and evidently, judging by all the morning tweets, spend 3 hours every morning not reading documents, or not only reading documents. It's a little like spending so many days at golf clubs and vacation spots after saying this.
I wouldn't leave the White House very much because, like little things like these little trips where they cost you a fortune. I love working. I'm not a vacation guy. I don't take vacations. I'm not like Obama where he takes Air Force One to Hawaii. I don't take vacations.
I promise you, I will not be taking very long vacations if I take them at all. There's no time for vacation.
Other people, they go away for weeks and weeks. I don't like taking vacations. Obama likes relaxing and going on vacations. Me, I like working. I really do. If I get elected president, I'm going to be in the White House a lot. I'm not leaving. We have deals to make. Who the hell wants to leave, right?
Well, today a spokesman told us, quote, "This president works tirelessly for the American people." He said it aboard Air Force One. And if you're wondering where the president was heading at the time on Air Force One, he was on his way first to give a speech in Nashville, then to see the college football national championship. So the question is this president a part-time president? Perspective now from CNN political director David Chalian and CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash. So, David, 3 hours of executive time, according to Axios, for a self-described very stable genius. President Trump's allies might say, what's concerning about that? He's allowed to make his own schedule.
And I would agree with those allies. He is allowed to make his own schedule, as you noted in what you were just going through, Anderson. George W. Bush came in at 6:45, Barack Obama between 9 and 10. Whatever the workflow of the day works for him, I wouldn't begrudge him that. I think you highlighted, though, the problem here. It's the hypocrisy in when you can clearly line up his tweets with what he's watching on television, just like he did when the New York Times reported last month that he watches a ton of cable TV, and then on Air Force One he says to reporters, I don't watch TV at all. It's just blatantly not true, because you can match up his Twitter feed to segments he watches on television.
Time now for the ridiculous, and we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the president's weekend declaration of his superior intellect. In a series of tweets, the president insisted that he is like really smart and a very stable genius, thereby becoming the latest in a long line of really smart people who publicly announce that they are geniuses. And by long line, I mean there are two other examples.
Permit me to introduce myself. My name is Coyote. Wile E. Coyote. Genius.
You guys, I'm like really smart now. You don't even know.
That's right, Wile E. Coyote and Kelly from The Office. And now the President of the United States. This came up briefly when Senator Lindsey Graham was on The View this morning.
So do you think he's like really smart and a stable genius?
I think this, if he doesn't call himself a genius, nobody else will.
Well, you gotta laugh, but it's not actually true that nobody else will call him a genius. A few came close yesterday, and one did, in fact, use the G word.
No one questions the stability of the president.
Well, President Trump is completely capable.
The reality is the president is a political genius.
A political genius. Okay, some people believe that, and that's fine, but that's not really what we're getting at here. On Twitter, many pointed to the Einstein quote, I am not a genius, I am just curious. Many more thought the only stable genius out there is America's favorite talking horse from days of TV yore, the famous Mr. Ed. And speaking of horses, of course, someone else tweeted, stable genius sounds like a Nat Geo show about a guy who helps horses with psychological and behavioral issues. There were also a few variations of this perspective. Quote, I've not lost my mind, he shouted into a handheld device at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. And really summing it up, I'm a very stable genius is something you hear a lot from very stable geniuses. Now, it's true that the president's Twitter declaration was about as subtle as a face tattoo that says, I'm understated. But if you think about it, he did show some remarkable restraint. For instance, he didn't even mention that he also happened to be the world's most highly skilled athlete.
I've seen this guy throw a dead spiral through a tire. I've seen him at Madison Square Garden with a top coat on. He's standing in the key and he's hitting foul shots and swishing them, okay? He sinks 3-foot putts.
See, he could have mentioned all of that, the putts, the swishes, and the dead spirals. He could have repeated that he has all the best words and hires the best people, went to the best college or colleges, and has the biggest hands. But he didn't. He just said one little thing about being like a really smart, stable genius, and that's what we like to call restraint and humility on The Ridiculous.